So the first thing is I've set up a Discord server for the YouTube channel, and the link to which is in the description. So feel free to join in on that and post links and information. The invite link should let you sign on, although you might have to register for Discord first. This video though is going to be a detailed look at the CYC X1 motor and the bike that I have running it on. I've been using the CYC motor since September last year, so about 8 months. The bike has changed quite a bit since I first installed the stock X1 motor and controller and gave my initial thoughts late last year. So this is kind of a mid-term report. In this video I'll be looking at the key components of the bike and why I made the choices that I did. There's definitely been a learning curve with this motor, so I will talk about what I've picked up through these experiences. The bike I have my X1 on is a Salsa Via 2. It was originally developed by Salsa to be a touring bike, so it has lots of mounting points for the various things you would need to go on, say, a cross-Canada trip, like pannier racks and bags. The frame also turned out to make an excellent gravel bike and is used in gravel races. At the time I bought it, we were based in Cold Lake, Alberta, and there are endless gravel roads to go riding on there, so it made a lot of sense. I've made a few modifications as part of the conversion to an e-bike, the most obvious being the switch to the flat handlebar style. I went for fairly wide style and it gives quite a lot of control, and I also got these shaped grips which I'm finding to be much more comfortable on longer rides. I also added suspension forks to the front of the bike, and I upgraded the cable actuated Avid brakes that came with the bike to Shimano XTs for the added stopping power. The result has been to lift up the riding position and make it more upright. With an e-bike like this, wind resistance is less of an issue, so for me the drop bars are a bit redundant. It's a nice cruising position and you can sit back and look around and be comfortable on the bike. It can be a bit more tricky on some of the very steep off-road stuff, particularly when starting, as you have to work harder to keep the weight balance over the front wheel. That's probably more my riding skill than anything else. The good thing about this frame though is that it has a massive triangle into which I'm able to mount the motor and the controller and a decent sized battery. I'm a pretty bony person and I am comfortable on my bikes. So really, unless you're actually going to be doing really serious off-roading, I don't think you really need the full suspension frame. I don't think I've missed it, because then you have the inevitable compromises of battery, controller and motor location. To provide a bit of extra comfort, I added the Cane Creek Thudbuster seat, which is essentially a suspension mechanism built into a seat post. It's great, it works really well. There are others on the market, but this one came with the best reviews. The remaining components of the bike are still the same stock stuff. Derailleur, wheel set, that all came with the bike when I bought it nearly 10 years ago. Overall, though, I think it's a brilliant frame. It's built to carry hundreds of pounds of weight as a touring bike, so it's ideal strength-wise for an e-bike. It's very stable on the road. It would be nice if I could use slightly wider tyres, but for a bike that I already owned, I'm pleased with how it's turned out to ride as an e-bike. I'm going to transition over now to some ride footage and talk a bit more about the various aspects of the bike. I thought I would change up the data display and stuff so you can see it nice and clearly, the amount of power that it's drawing under different riding conditions. I've also been having to play with some video effects, so I hope you like them. I may have gone a little bit over the top. The objective with this bike is essentially to create the ultimate multi-use bike for the suburbs and cities. So as much versatility as possible to allow it to go as many places as possible and be used for as many different purposes as possible. Beyond the city, the bike also performs really well on dirt and gravel roads, which is what a lot of Salsa Vias are used for anyway. So really, it's fast and easy to commute to work. I was able to get to my job faster than in my car with all the equipment I needed, as well as not needing to change clothes when I get there. The bike can also use lots of different trails. I mean, you might not be able to throw it downhill or bounce it over rock gardens, but you can certainly go out and enjoy light trails, no problem, and I have done lots of times. You can definitely use any sort of cut through and other sort of shortcut. I think it can be used for a year-round bike, but really only on roads and trails that are actually ploughed and maintained. The bike is designed to be comfortable on long-range rides on gravel and dirt roads, and they kind of litter the area where I live, and so far it's done very well. You can also get some exercise value from the bike as well if you want to do so. It's definitely possible, and I'm hoping to greatly refine that aspect of the bike as I develop it further. I have just under 2,000 kilometers on the build so far, and I have not run into any problems. The mechanical parts all seem to be secured tight and functioning as intended. I am careful to keep both chains lubricated, and I perform standard safety checks before I ride. The chain is a pretty standard SRAM or SRAM chain, and it's still passing inspection with the chain wear tool. The cassette seems fine, and since I got PAS working, it's stayed working. Once I get a longer range battery that can handle the current drain of the X1 better, I'll record some longer range rides. I have a few routes that I really want to try. So how does the bike ride? Well, the throttle is really smooth and very responsive, and that's very much a characteristic of the ASI controller. It has no lag whatsoever, and for me it represents an upgrade over the throttle control offered with the Gen 1 stock controller. Has the Gen 2 controller improved this? I hope so. If you have the Gen 2 controller and want to say how the throttle is, by all means post in the comments. If you ask the bike to go, it really shifts. If you want to push things, it will do well in excess of 50 kph on the flat and almost as fast uphill. Although your power consumption will go up massively if you do push the motor in all conditions. The footage that's playing now is more representative of how I ride the bike the bulk of the time. So yeah, I can do nearly 80 down this hill, but battery wise I'm dumping 3000 watts for the privilege of doing so. I can cruise this same hill at a shade over 50 kilometers an hour and consume less than a third of the power to maintain that speed. I like to reserve the battery and the power for where I really need it, and here that's climbing hills, which are everywhere, and not trying to go as fast as possible downhill, although it can be fun to try. So there are 10 gears on this bike, but if I could pick only one, it would have to be this one, which I think is a 28T. If I was running the bike at a high voltage, then this would probably be the gear to fix and just use a beefy chain with, at least with this chainring setup anyway. But in this gear you can accelerate smoothly from a standstill to 42 kilometers an hour very quickly. The acceleration from 20 kph through to 42 is really good feeling. I literally sit in this gear all the way up this 9% hill and just modulate the throttle. At max speed, like I say, it tops out at 42 kilometers an hour, so it's almost like having a cruise control or a speed limiter just with the gear. If you move 2 gears higher, you can sit at about 53 kilometers an hour. It will hold this 53 relatively efficiently on the flat and no problems downhill. It will hold it on a moderate hill, but on the steeper hills you're kind of reaching that point where the motor, even at maximum power, is struggling to reach like the high RPMs, so you're sucking huge amounts of power to go, really only a few kilometers an hour faster than an efficient speed. The energy payoff to go at the very top speeds with an electric bike like this is quite severe. So I guess my tip for choosing motor and battery combinations is to go for something that, if you push it, will go faster, or quite a bit faster than the speeds that you like to ride at, right? And that means that when you ride it, the speed, your regular speed, your cruising speed, the bike will be efficient and it will probably last longer as well. Any higher than this gear on the flat, and you're pushing the motor to not really go that much faster, but you can if you want. I got 78 kph out of the hill that I include on my testing and comparison rides, but I want the bike to be a versatile urban bike, particularly for urban rural areas and suburbs, not really a street racer. A bike that you can get to work with efficiently and cleanly and not go going really, really fast down Main Street. So it has the characteristics of being light and quick, rapid acceleration to an efficient cruising speed, and able to run with traffic on the majority of the world's city streets. A lot of the design thoughts going on with this bike are me having one eye on the future, or at least the future that I'd like to encourage, one where we're able to use light electric vehicles like this legally to help clean our cities and reduce our consumption. So a bike that operates efficiently within the boundary of hopefully realistically changed laws. I have a few ideas about how such a system might work, but I think that's for another video. So let's talk about batteries, because let's face it, the bike isn't going to run without one. And I've seen a few people on the forums run into some difficulties with batteries for this motor. As you might have noticed with my videos, the CYC can pull some high amps, particularly when the throttle is opened up on hill climbs or when pushing the limits of a higher gear on the flat. My triangle pack from EM3EV has a 50 amp continuous BMS with the trip set, I think they said at 62 amps. I never encountered any issues with the stock controller, but as soon as I first opened up the throttle on a climb with the BAC800 installed, it tripped the BMS. The LiPo cells I have are high spec to the point of overkill, so as soon as I switched to them it was fine. Now, there's nothing wrong with using a lower spec pack with the X1, but you may need to limit the current draw on the motor to take into account of the battery. Also understand that the maximum output of the motor cannot be realised, which might be fine. So the minimum specs that I recommend to get the motor to perform at its best are cells and a BMS capable of 60 amps continuous and 80 amps burst. And there are not actually that many sources of such batteries. I'll leave a few links in the description, but also if people would like to post links, then please do so. I'm actually going to be using Lightspeed bikes for my next pack, and the design so far is looking at a 140 cell unit, so 14S 10P, using the Sony VT6 cells, I think. The BMS will allow at least 100 amps continuous. My attitude with batteries is that if you want them to last, then you should overspec them in terms of the range and also in terms of the discharge, because the battery is going to last much longer if you're not thrashing it to its limits every single ride. If you look at my triangle pack from EM3EV, the pack is actually now starting to lose capacity, and I'd say it's down to about 85% of its factory capacity. I think I have used it a lot, but if I'm honest, it would have lasted longer if I was not running it all the time at its maximum continuous discharge. But then when I bought it, I was only running it at 30 amps, so I've not run the X1 above 52 volts yet. The motor apparently does not run well with the BAC800 at high RPMs. The BAC2000 will run it at high RPMs much better because it carries a more advanced feature set with its firmware, but you need to mount a much larger controller then, and the thing I love about the BAC800 is its excellent form factor. Now it gets a bit more complicated as the BAC855 is now replacing the BAC800, and supposedly it has better thermal characteristics as well as bringing the firmware in line with the larger BAC controllers like the 2000, 4000, 8000. So it is likely that stable high RPMs would be possible with this BAC as well. Except if you think the motor's high pitched when I ride it at 52 volts, it absolutely bloody screams at 15,000 RPM, and that's easily reachable with 72 volts. I don't think that despite it being capable, that having that high of an RPM is useful or desirable in the type of bike that I want to build. Maybe if your goal is for a dirt bike installation where you have like one fixed gear and the characteristics you want are high torque, rapid acceleration, without needing a super high top speed. But these high RPMs are not really ideal for the jack of all trades versatile bike that I'm trying to produce. That being said, I would like to leverage the performance advantages of the 72-volt battery over acceleration and especially over heat control. So I am looking into the possibility of using the NXT display to actively limit the top RPM of the motor. This would enable you to put in the full 3,500 watts that the BAC800 can put out at around 40 to 45 amps, whereas the 52-volt BAC will struggle to put out 3,500 watts, and it will be doing it at amp levels peaking around 70. And as the amps generate the heat in the motor, it should run quite a bit cooler with the 72-volt pack. I mean, despite it being better at shedding heat than BBSHD, the X1 is not invincible, and I have seen an example of it being utterly run into the ground with an external controller that had no safety cutoffs enabled. So I now have the BAC800 on the bike, and I probably won't be taking it off. The jump in performance over the stock one is considerable. On a 52-volt battery with a stock controller, I was able to hit roughly 7,000 RPM. With the ASI, I'm able to reach north of 8,000. I think it's fair to say that there were some issues with the general controller. A lot of people had poor throttle response. Various upgrades to the firmware did not really seem to improve things that much. I haven't tried the latest firmware patch for the Gen 1, but reportedly it's led to quite a few failures to the point where I'm pretty sure I read that CYC themselves were recommending the BAC855 for Gen 1 customers with controller issues. If I was going to order the CYC X1 today for this style of bike, I would order it with the BAC855, because not only will you get a nice discount on the back by ordering it via CYC, you also leave open the option of switching out the wiring harness and running with the NXT once it's available on the X1 Gen 2. The only real loss, in my opinion, is there's no phone app integration, which is not really that much of a loss to me. I haven't tried the latest release, but it doesn't look to have changed that much. Perhaps people using the app can put their experiences in the comments section. I think it's a matter of choice, but personally I have zero desire to integrate my phone into my bike's ecosystem. I do know of people though that really do like the idea of using their phone as a display. I just haven't seen anything that would persuade me to want to go this route yet. That said, I haven't personally tried the Gen 2 controller, so if people would like to comment on how it's running with the torque sensor in the comments, that would be great. I asked for comments on the CYC website, but I haven't heard anything yet. I haven't heard much about the Gen 2 yet, to be honest, but the forums are also not littered with tales of woe, so probably that's a good thing. I think that when it was released, the weakest link for me with the CYC kit was the PAS. If you order it today though, you will get the new torque sensor, which, while I've not tried, I have heard positive feedback on. CYC were good enough to send me the parts, but I've actually forwarded them on to Alan ERT so it can be configured to run with the NXT, because if we can get that running, then we can do an upgrade kit for the Gen 2 X1. But yeah, I kind of ran into a lot of problems getting PAS running, although I do now have it running on the bike, and in this part of the video I'm actually using PAS to ride up through this hilly section. And it's okay, I guess. It's the same kind of inflexible and difficult to balance system that you find on the BBSHD. Fortunately, that means it also should benefit from the PAS tuning options that I'm looking to help develop for the NXT, but that's for another video and future development of the bike. I think when I first looked at the X1, I also said that the motor was the best part of the kit, and I think that is very much still the case. It's not given me any trouble since it's been on the bike, and it has nearly 2,000 kilometers on it at the moment. It runs cool under the conditions and loads I've subjected it to, certainly well within its operating specifications. Not that much has actually changed on the motor since Gen 1. The rotor's had a few modifications, but in reality nothing that really affects performance unless you start to want to push it past 9,000 RPM. I'm very happy with it. It's powerful enough to propel a bike at decent speeds with efficient use of power. You can run this motor up to about 6 kilowatts, although the higher power examples I've seen are more in the 4.5 to 5 kilowatt range. For the style of e-bike conversions that I've done so far though, the motor sits at 3 kilowatts really nicely. It delivers a safe, reliable ride and gets you really good range on your battery. So the bike is already a ton of fun to ride. There are a few things though that would complete it for me. The first is pretty easy, and it's just simply by using longer range batteries with the performance characteristics that do suit the X1. I have some new packs being built by Lightspeed for both 52 and 72 volt use. I also have a lot of cool routes that I'd like to try, and I'll be using maybe my rack to take both batteries with me and get some really long range runs in. The next part though involves using the NXT to help tune powers, and also hopefully let me run the bike at 72 volts while restricting the RPMs. Beyond this, I have another X1 motor that I'd like to try out on a more kind of moto style frame, but with the BAC800. So thanks for watching, and an even bigger thanks if you're subscribed to the channel. If you would like to support the channel further, you can now do so via the Patreon system. Via this platform, I'll also be sharing the various 3D printed designs and models I've produced for download, as well as anything else I come up with as the channel develops. Patreon supporters also as well get to access a private Discord server where I will be hosting more content, including the various community projects. You will also have a say in the future direction of the channel and which projects are taken up and developed with the funding available. If my video helped you and you just fancied buying the Captain a pint, you can also do that as well via the PayPal link in the description. All funding will be used to promote and develop light electric vehicle technology. Well, unless you specifically ordered me to buy a pint, in which case I'm going to buy a pint. Anyway, thanks for watching again. Cheers.